Good morning, friends. First, happy Pride Month, especially to the members of this community and those who are watching online who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. We celebrate you. We are grateful for you. We love you as you are, without condition or caveat. As I was exposed earlier, yes, it was my birthday. My birthday is June 1st, which is also the beginning of Pride Month, and I love that those things coincide because as I've gotten older, that day is often a time for me to reflect upon my life, as we do on birthdays, but to reflect on the life of this nation and to try to soberly see where we are. A couple of years ago, I was with my family during my birthday week, and I was outwardly lamenting getting older. Maybe I was fishing for compliments with my family. And instead of saying, "Oh, you're not old," or "Oh, you're a cool dad," or "Age is just a number," my teenage son said, "It happens." So he has since been removed from the will. He did not read the room to see what I was trying to ask for. But I am 57 years old now, and as I've told you before, it took far too many of those years to realize something about myself, that I was a person of profound privilege. Now, I've talked to you before about the privilege bundle, but to refresh your memory, when you go for internet service or you call a cable service provider, you're going to talk to a customer service representative, and they're invariably going to ask you a question. Well, would you like to bundle those services, right, with phone or internet? And they make you think you're getting something at a discount when you're probably getting ripped off for something you don't need. But as I've gotten older, I realize that I have been given the privilege bundle. When you check the boxes off, I have all of them. White, straight, male, raised in a middle class, upper middle class environment, right? So I've got them all. And it took me a long time to realize that and to begin to think about the ways that my life had been made easier, the doors that had been opened for me, the advantages I had, the barriers that were removed from me simply by showing up. Now, we all have some forms of privilege in this room, right? Privilege that others live without because of our gender or our pigmentation or our nation of origin or our appearance or our income level or our life stage. We all have some sort of advantage. Now, what is this privilege? Well, it's actual social currency. Privilege is a resource that we have received largely without earning it. And the best response to our awareness of that privilege is not guilt, is not defensiveness. It's to continually try to figure out how to spend that currency on behalf of those who do not have the privileges we have. To transform our privilege into equity in the world. To expand the table of hospitality by our spending of the resources that we've been given. Practically speaking, privilege means allowing people or helping people have inherent rights or respect or comforts that they do not have, or that if they have them, they have to continually fight tirelessly to have them, and they can never rest that those things are settled. I think that's the thing that's been coming to me over and over lately, is that people who were given things, who fought for things to have these realities, then pulled away. And we're seeing it all over, right? I've never had to fight for inclusion because of my bundle of privilege. And as we enter Pride Month, we do so while experiencing a renaissance of homophobia and transphobia. An unapologetic attack on the LGBTQ community. Most specifically, the transgender community, a minority community within a minority community. They have become the focal point for the conservative movement's violence. And we know, friends, that that movement runs on fear. That is the engine of bigotry. But fear, ignorance. And that fear requires a target, a threat, an adversary. And we know from just looking around, from just reading the news, that marriage equality, adoption rights for same-sex couples, spousal partner health insurance, and gender-affirming care are all in jeopardy. I've actually had friends ask me why we need pride. People are still, and guess who those people are who ask that? People with the bundle. We need pride for a lot of reasons, but here are some. We need pride because the ACLU is currently tracking 530 anti-LGBTQ bills around the country. They range from healthcare barriers, to school sports bans, to curriculum censorship, to forced outings in schools, to so-called religious exemptions, to drag bans, to attacks on expression and visibility for the LGBTQ community. We need pride because this week, Tennessee State Representative posted on social media, homosexuality has no place in America. Happy Nuclear Family Month. Andy Ogles is that representative. We need pride because last year the president signed an executive order declaring the federal government will only recognize two unchangeable sexes, male and female, and another banning trans women from participating in women's sports. We need pride because LGBTQ youth are over 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight and cisgender peers. And according to the survey by the Trevor Project, approximately 39% of LGBTQ youth seriously consider attempting suicide annually. We need pride, friends, because schools around this country and in this state and in our county are trying to remove books mentioning LGBTQ people from schools and libraries. These things are happening right now. Now, many of you know about Project 2025. If you don't, you weren't listening to me. In 2024, I remember coming and speaking about this, and what that was the conservative Christian agenda for America post-election in the event of a conservative victory and a conservative majority in Congress, which have both come to pass. And I wanted to share a few excerpts in light of Pride Month to remind you of how much allyship and advocacy matter. Bruce, could you pull those up? This is from the document Project 2025. The next conservative president must make the institution of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. That's you. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other terms used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. Pause here. Focus. Terms used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment. Now, here comes the next part. Back one. Pornography, defined by, manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. So these things, the LGBTQ community has no First Amendment protection. Its purveyors, people who support and share these things, are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. The accusation is always a confession, by the way. Remember that. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Last. Pornography should be outlawed. Remember, pornography was transgender human beings and queer people. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. So posting about it, sharing about it. The people who produce it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. Thanks, Bruce. So I share this because one of the architects of that document recently stated, we propose 1,913 recommendations for Project 2025. As of late last year, over 1,000 have been implemented by our president. So they're already over halfway to doing these things. And if you work in sectors that deal with DEI, or you're part of school systems, or you're in local government, or you're just aware of what's happening, you see what we're dealing with, right? So my question is, what do we do? How do we respond to that, knowing that people are being criminalized? Because these things transcend politics. It's important that we realize that. This is about erasing people, immigrants, LGBTQ people, people of color. So we're here on Pride. And Pride is a celebration. It should be. It's an affirmation, and it should be. But it's important for us to remember, friends, that Pride started as a riot, as a fierce protest. In June of 1969 at a bar called the Stonewall Inn. And at the time, there were masquerade and cross-dressing laws in place that suggested a man or a woman must be wearing a certain number of clothing pieces that identified them with the gender they have on their ID. And the police took advantage of these laws to raid drinking establishments and arrest transgender and non-conforming people. And just after midnight on June 28, 1969, the year that I was born, the police raided the Stonewall, but this time, people there fought back. Now, there are differing accounts on what happened, but one of the accounts says the tipping point was that a woman was being dragged away by police, and she looked around and said, "Why don't you do something? Why are you just standing there?" And I got to tell you, friends, this question haunts me every day. Because we get so numb to bigotry that it no longer gets the reaction that it should get. I think we're being drowned in hatred to the point where we can't even respond to it anymore. There is a dangerous apathy, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone. That's the question, why are you just standing there, that I think we need to wrestle with together. With regard to discrimination against the LGBTQ community, but regards all vulnerable, marginalized, oppressed people. Because in a month celebrating the dignity and worth of our neighbors, when we make outward displays of affirmation, when we work for a nation where no one has to hide who they are. Pride, as I understand it, at its heart is about identity, about fighting to ensure that everyone can live into their truest truth without fear or hindrance. And I'm willing to bet that every single person here or watching online sees themselves as an LGBTQ ally if you are not part of the LGBTQ community. That philosophically and intellectually, we agree that someone's gender identity and sexual orientation or marriage has no bearing on their inherent worth, and that they should have every human and civil right provided, that these things should never be a barrier or a penalty or cause for exclusion. And while that's true, I hope for all of us, we may be better at aspiring to allyship than actually embodying it. There's a story we tell ourselves about who we are, and there's a story that our lives tell, right? So what does it mean to be an ally? An anti-racist, feminist, social justice advocate, to move from being a supporter to being a collaborator, to publicly affirm the humanity of a community with such clarity and volume that those who do not affirm that humanity are made uncomfortable in our presence. I think bigots are too comfortable right now. Our neighbors are feeling emboldened. Our family members feel free to say things they might never have said before because they feel like they have a kindred spirit at the top. What does that mean for all of us? It means that our presence and our volume have to be more profound than they've ever been. I went to Pride in 2023, and I remember they had this giant wall of fabric, and people were holding that wall up, and they were standing between the protesters, the violent people, and those who were simply trying to exist. And that wall and the people holding that wall are what I feel we are called to be right now, to be those who stand in the way of hatred, to shield those who have less privilege than we do, to risk something so that other people can have what we have without even asking for it. Now, as most of you know, my journey to some sort of national awareness began with a blog post called If I Have Gay Children. It was a piece by me just trying to humanize the issue of sexuality for conservative Christians who dehumanize people so easily. And pushback and anger certainly came. My neighbors suddenly realized what I was for and what I would not abide. And that made for some awkward conversations in the days following because we had just moved into the neighborhood. But my privilege always insulated me, and it still does. As a cisgender heterosexual man, my moral worth was never in question. My very identity was not being attacked. My human rights were never in jeopardy. So any turbulence or venom were minor by comparison. I know that I am always in the black. Now, I want to pause, because what you might be hearing from me today is that to be an ally, you need to be confrontational or antagonistic or abrasive, but you don't. That's my job. This is important for all of us. Our advocacy, our allyship, our activism of any kind should be congruent with our personalities. Some of us do need to be out front and vocal and confrontational, and some of us need to be in the relational places where relational activism happens. Some of us do the quieter work, the gentle nudging. But I want you to find whatever it is congruent with your personality that you are not doing yet, simply because those 1900 suggestions are going to be made real if things don't change. It doesn't mean all is lost. It just means we get to decide who we're going to be. I'm inviting you to be so outwardly loving and affirming and supporting of LGBTQ people that your simple existence feels confrontational or antagonistic to those hoarding privilege. Your presence should be slightly unsettling so that discrimination never begins to feel normal, so that there is always resistance to exclusion. Because when we look back at history, in all of those times when bigotry was having the upper hand, when discrimination was injustice was happening, there were always people to say, not on my watch, right? What's beautiful is that we get to be those people. We get to say, what do I care about? And we get to live into that. Allies, I think, normalize marginalized communities by humanizing them, by making sure that people are not reduced to caricatures or stereotypes. Because that act alone will feel offensive to people whose politics and theology have trafficked in fear and distortions and false stories. Because whether we're talking about the LGBTQ community or people of color or immigrants, It's always a distortion of reality that people are afraid of. It is never the reality of diversity. Diversity, when it shows up, is so beautiful that it's undeniable. Whenever there is prejudice, that prejudice is best confronted by those with similar privilege who outwardly dissent, because those are the voices that carry the most weight. What does that mean? The fight against homophobia and transphobia is not the fight of the queer community alone. It's not a gay problem. It's not a lesbian problem. It's not a transgender problem. It's a cisgender heterosexual problem. Because those are the people fighting the existence of other human beings. Xenophobia is not an immigrant or foreigner issue. It is a native-born issue. LGBTQ people are not helpless, right? They're fully formed human beings. That's the actual point. But they're not in a place to have an audience with many of those who perpetuate bigotry. I feel like what we do as allies when we're at our best is we take a community, a group of people we know and love, and we carry them with us into the spaces where they are not welcome or represented properly, and we get to offer a dissenting opinion. So my privilege allows me to have proximity with a lot of white Christian folks, and I get to say, surprise, here's something I hope you remember. Here's the danger of this message and what I've shared so far. It can be easy to think that this all means centering yourself as an ally. But it really means that you remember that your rights are already secured. Your worth is not in doubt. And in the centering of those for whom that is not true, you risk something. We have Wake Forest pride here now. We did not always have a Wake Forest pride. And the reason we have it is because two women looked around at their community and said, I am not going to stand by and let this happen. I need to have our people represented. And now it's growing. And there are probably two people in this room who have some passion. There are probably a couple people in this room who feel a burden for a marginalized community, who see injustice, who see hatred and say, I'm not okay with that. So take that burden and let it transform into some sort of tangible act. That's all allyship is. It's getting from the heart to the hand. Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin says, there will not be a magic day when we wake up and it's now okay to express ourselves publicly. We make that day by doing things publicly until it's simply the way things are. Friends, as you try to be an ally, here's some news. It may not go well. As much as you approach someone with love, as carefully as you choose your words, as gentle as you may want to be, it may not be received in the spirit in which it's offered. That's the most important time for the ally. We need to brave the awkward silences and the difficult conversations and the coldness and the separations, because people are worth it. In these perilous days, to be a straight ally is to risk profound turbulence within our circles of influence. It's intentionally stepping in the path of verbal and physical violence. It's loudly outing oneself as a human being who will not permit hatred in their midst. It's being willing to make bigots uncomfortable. Because if we end this month, and we wear our rainbow stuff and we go to parades and we post on social media, but we end this month without finding ourselves in a difficult conversation with an uninformed family member, without experiencing a coldness from our transphobic neighbors, without bringing tension to our social circles, without facing the insults and threats that LGBTQ people experience just for waking up and living, then I think we'll have failed as allies. But here's what I'm going to invite you to do. I want to talk about this a little bit. I want to hear what's going on in your heads as I'm sharing. And I especially want to hear from members of the LGBTQ community, if you're willing to share, about what being an ally means to you. You can tell me this is all garbage, honestly. Because that's the heart of being a good ally, is listening to the people that you're advocating for